mobile devices. Yep. Yep. Okay. That needs to be plugged in. I'll just do that.
In case I need it.
That'd be the reason why I can't change the order on notes on the iPhone.
Order of notes. Notes are normally sorted by a specific order, which is by last modified. So unless you, I don't know if that's even possible to change it. Because that's how it always looks for me. So I'm assuming that's standard. I'll plug that in. Well, that's no. The whole point of notes is that your most recent one is the one near the top. So. Yeah, so mine is sorted by time of, when I've actually gone into them. View, there's not even any sort options there. So it is by definition always sorted in order of most recently opened or modified or something like that. So if you want something which is in a different order, don't use notes. Find some other application which does what you want, because that's just Apple's notes. There are a multitude of third-party notes-like apps. The question is, if you wanted to sync between the computer and the iPhone, iPad, then you need to find one that works on all platforms, similarly to Apple's notes. But there are a variety of different ones, and it's just a matter of finding one that you like and which does what you want. So Apple's notes is good enough, and I've just used this new feature to create a table, which they've added in the recent operating systems, for example, which makes it easier for me to do this previously boring text format, and it's now editable. I can copy and paste it into my spreadsheet and it works nicely. I'll just turn that off so I don't waste battery. 50, I just had my birthday a couple of weeks ago. Yes, I'm now eligible to join SeniorNet. Do you think they could teach me anything?
I was eligible last year.
Yeah.
I'm actually 1 year older than David.
Yeah. Okay. What's going on here? If I take that and I don't want that. Oh, it's in full screen mode. That's why. Take it out of full screen mode. Then I should be in the right place. Yep, cool. Okay, right. So if there's no more questions, we can get on with the main topic. So basically, the theory is that if especially if I'm here and we can hopefully do this sort of thing at the start of the meeting, the goal is, like at Wellington, if anybody's got any generally interesting questions that other people might benefit from, it's quite helpful just to be able to ask the question and other people might learn something from the answers, is the hope. Unfortunately, the Wellington one tends to go overboard with detailed, complicated questions, and I try to cut them short if they're not going to be either easy to solve quickly or they'll take too long to answer, or they're not particularly of greater enough interest. Okay. All right, so where was I? I was going to start with what is new. They call all the new Apple stuff. I brought along Capital Apple to remind me. My only two remaining copies. So one thing we forgot to talk about at the Wellington meeting, we ran out of time because question and answers went too long and supper went too long, is the new iPad, the updated 2018 iPad model. I have not seen one yet, but I've seen some descriptions of it. So the basic, as I said in Capital Apple, the basic difference between last year's model and this year's model is it's faster and it supports the Apple Pencil. Otherwise, it's pretty much identical. So same price, same capacities, same colours, that sort of thing. If you haven't bought an iPad recently, you may, if you have an older model and you were thinking about getting a newer one at some point, it seems that Apple's is now we're going to do an annual refresh sort of mode. So if you think for example, in Brian's case, iPad 2 is getting a bit long in the tooth and there's an increasing number of things it won't do properly because it won't run current software, then at some point it may be worth considering buying a new one. And then this model is generally the ideal one to get, unless you specifically want the fancier features of the iPad Pro. And as I said I think in the magazine, if you were considering buying an iPad Pro, I'd recommend waiting at least until next month, because that's a year after Apple released the last model, and it's likely they'll release new iPad Pros soon, whether it happens at Developer Conference or some other time. Oh, well, this is what, iPad's 10% off or something like that? because I haven't seen iPads on special very often, but they might be trying to get rid of old stock if they know. Sorry, 350 for what? iPad, entry-level iPad. Mm. That's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know how they're getting away with it doing it that cheaply, because normal price is over 500.
Well, it depends what year it was released.
True, it might be not a model. It might be getting rid of old stock from a. They all look pretty similar. The iPad, the current iPad models are almost indistinguishable from the iPad Air from a few years ago. So that's the iPad Air there. So they all look pretty much the same as that in terms of the size and depth and width and thickness and all that sort of thing. The iPad Air 2 was the odd one out. That was thinner. So the iPad Air 2 got thinner and then it got thicker again with the iPad 5th generation, as they started calling it later on, even though I'd call this one the 5th generation because it's really the next one. But
so the iPad Air 2, that's not, you wouldn't need to replace that?
Well, that's still a reasonably current model.
Yeah.
Effectively what they're doing is they're keeping one processor generation behind the, how does it work? The iPad Pro, the 1st generation, was a bit behind the iPhone in terms of getting the latest processors, but the update of the iPad Pro, and again it was a bit behind the latest iPhones. Their normal iPads, not the Pro models, are one generation back from that, so until they, except briefly during an overlap period. So effectively, this one has an A7 processor, the iPad Air 2 has an A8, the iPad 5th generation, that's the last year's model, has an A9, and the iPad 6th generation, that's 2018 current model, is an A10. So it's gone up one processor generation each time. The iPad Pro is currently also an A10, but it's a more powerful chip, so it's still faster than the standard iPad, but it's now the same generation, so there's not as much of an advantage. So the expectation is that the iPad Pro, when it gets updated, will move to an A11, which is the same processor as the current iPhone 10 and iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, but it's just 6 months behind it. So it's sort of like a delay or a lag compared to when the iPhone gets the latest processor. Mainly because they probably can't make them fast enough. The iPhone is by in staggeringly huge numbers much more popular than the iPad. It's like a factor of 4 to 1 roughly, I think, from memory. So there is a limit to the rate at which they can build processors, because they're consuming all the manufacturing capacity just in order to keep up with the iPhone demand as fast as they can. So until that settles down a bit, then they can start to think about supplying similar processors and iPads. So that's the reasoning behind that sort of timing lag mainly.
There's no word whether they're going to keep making them.
Well, given the Mini 4 had lost its entry-level model, they've only retained the higher capacity option. The Mini, that's now more expensive than the entry-level 9.7-inch iPad, and it's running on an A8 processor, which is now 3 generations out of date. The likelihood is that the Mini 4 will get quietly discontinued at some point, and Apple probably won't bother making another one. Mainly because I think Apple would know the sales figures, and of course they're not available to the rest of the public, including me. But the likely explanation is that the iPad 9.7-inch has remained the most popular model by a substantial margin. The Mini was an interesting niche product that some people appreciated, especially women with handbags, I expect, because it fits much more easily. And they kept making them for a while, but there were probably technical limitations, which meant they couldn't advance them as quickly as they were tending to lag behind the normal iPads in terms of processors and things like that. So the iPad Mini 4 is roughly the same as an iPad Air 2, except it's got a slower processor in it, so they're using the same generation, but not as fast. So the likelihood is that will just stop being sold at some point once they decide they're not going to sell A8s anymore. Right now, the Air, which is an A7, is the oldest model iPad which is still supported by the latest operating system, so I'm expecting this one will not be able to upgrade to the next operating system later this year. So there's about a year to go on the Minis and the...
But then, is there any need to upgrade, really?
If you can, you should, because you don't get security updates. and if you run, now I've deliberately left this one running an older one just for comparison's sake, because I've got 2 iPads, I don't need this one in normal use, so I'm happy to leave it one version behind just to see what it looks like, so I can compare them. But that one I keep up to date. My iPhone I keep up to date, so there's no. It's not generally it's a good idea to try and do that, but sometimes there is a good reason to delay upgrading to a new major version because of early compatibility problems, bugs and things which take a wee while to sort out. We're effectively halfway through the latest operating system now, so it should be at a point where it is reasonably stable.
The other thing is too, capacity-wise as well, because the old models are smaller capacity, now they're bringing out larger capacity as well. And some of your apps.
The app's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, yep.
As well, and non-compatible on the older ones.
Yep.
That was the reason why I went to the 10.5 iPad Pro, because the Mini was getting thing, and the thing is, me upgrading it too also gave me quite a bit of sale back on the iPad Mini.
Yeah, the earlier you sell an old model, the more resale value it has, is the usual rule. So if you are intending to replace it, then selling your old one rather than hanging on to it if you don't need it. Then
yeah, especially if you can get an extra $200 on it, and if you hold on for another year and a half, you might only get 300 for it, you get 500. You know.
Okay, so unless anybody has any specific iPad questions, I can move on from there now. So that was just wanting to sort of cover the state of play with that one. So the other major things we wanted to just go over again briefly was the current state of play of iOS and macOS. So as I briefly showed earlier, I have now upgraded my main Mac to High Sierra, which I hadn't done as of the point I wrote this article. It happened the following weekend. So I've been running High Sierra now for a week and a bit on my main computer, just to get a feel for it, and I've now got to the point where my Time Machine backups are working again, but they weren't when I was at the Wellington meeting a week ago. I hadn't actually finished the first backup yet, so I couldn't be sure that was all right. It's now I can tell it's fine. I haven't had any major sort of system level problems that I'm aware of. There's been one peculiar display glitch which has never repeated itself, so I don't know what caused it. But apart from that, it's been stable as far as the operating system goes. What I am aware of, and I've keep referring to in the magazine, is certain old applications are not working properly in High Sierra. One of them is FileMaker Pro, which probably nobody else apart from me is running. Well, me, Shane and Graham possibly. If you have an old enough version, it crashes if you're running High Sierra. It didn't crash in Sierra, so that's a new incompatibility. If you are still running the iWork 09 version of Pages, Numbers and Keynote, which is the specific version numbers I can tell you if you need to know, but they're the versions that was the last one that Apple sold as a retail product called iWork, before they did a complete rewrite and threw out all the feature set and started again and built it up gradually over subsequent versions. So officially iWork 09 was only supported up to Mountain Lion, macOS 10, 10.8. It actually kept working in 10.9, 10.10, 10.11, 10.12, and I've been using it fine ever since then, while Apple slowly adds back features which, in the later versions have now got to a point where I think I can use them, but I haven't heavily used them yet, so I'm only dabbling in them so far. But with 10.13, if I try and actually start using some of these things now, where's iWork? iWork 09. If I try and run Keynote and open a recent presentation, that'll do. It's a random presentation I had previously, which I think I just had some notes in, and I hit the play button. So basically I can edit presentations, I cannot play them, which makes Keynote half pointless. So that is pretty much ruling out me using the old version of Keynote. The old version of Pages, still I haven't used heavily yet, but it seemed to be okay. I think I upgraded after I did Capital Apple, so I haven't used it extensively. And I did use Numbers heavily last night to do all my accounts, to do my update for my GST return and things like that. And I found that Numbers, make sure I'm not running anything important, crashes if I try and edit the table names over here. Gone. So Numbers 09 is also unstable, but only in one area that I found so far. So basically, if you're still using the old version of Keynote numbers and pages and don't want to move to the new version, then avoid High Sierra because they're not compatible, and they haven't been supported for years anyway. But they just kept working up until last year, in
What
effect.
about Office for Mac?
Office for Mac, I've got Office 2011 and 2008 on here. I don't use them heavily, so I can't easily say how well they work. I basically bought them second-hand on the theory that if somebody sent me an Office document, I would at least be able to open it without mangling it, because everything else tends to mess it up when you try and import it and export it again. The official position is that Microsoft stopped supporting Office 2011 about a week after High Sierra was released. That was the final update for it was that month, and they're never going to update it again. And therefore, if there are any known security problems, they will never get fixed. So the rule of thumb with Microsoft Office is that you shouldn't be using it to open documents received from other people unless you're running an up-to-date version, because you're at risk of macroviruses and things that might be infecting the documents.
So Office for Mac 2016.
2016 is supported, is compatible, and is being updated, so that's fine. Only problem is that some people don't like it. And the degree of dislike seems to go up as you go into later and later versions. The Office 2008, some people don't even want to update to Office 2011 because they don't like the changes with the ribbon user interface. And then Office 2016 went even further with that, and some people don't like that either. But Office 2016 is the only supported version at the moment. However, it's worth noting if you haven't bought Office 2016 yet and you're contemplating it, hold off, because we already know that Office 2019 is going to be coming out later this year. So if you buy Office 2016 as a one-off purchase, it will quickly become out of date and get superseded by something else. And it will only get software updates from Microsoft for about 5 years. So I think Office 2011 came out in 2010, in fact, and stopped being updated in 2017, so they sort of do about 7 years of support, but that was stretched because 2016 was a bit late. If they're doing it every 3 years, then they won't support the previous version as often. Also with, sorry, yep, you can. Yeah, they are. They're heavily pushing the subscription model, which is Office 365, they call it, as in every day of the year is the name. You're paying for this every day. Office 365 is the main way they're trying to encourage people to go that way, and they give you extra features if you have Office 365. You can still buy it, but it's harder to find. You may find that retailers aren't stocking it anymore unless you hunt around and find one who is. You can buy them from Microsoft, but you've got to go hunting for it. It's not visible immediately in their website. You've got to go, I want to buy the standalone copy, and sort of hunt around the right. It's buried off in a locked filing cabinet in a disused lavatory at the bottom of the stairs, which are out with a sign on the door saying "Beware of the leopard" kind of thing. For those who know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I can sort of remember that, but. So Office 2016 you can buy, but as I said, if you don't have it yet, I don't recommend buying that version because it's probably only 3 months or so until they release Office 2019 anyway. It's been rumoured so far, but it's been sort of mentioned in more than one place, so I think it's quite likely that that's coming soon. And apparently the next version, Office 2019 for the Mac, is going to be even closer to the Windows version in terms of functionality and user interface and things. So they're gradually moving more and more stuff over to the Mac version and making them more equivalent. Possibly not all the way yet, but Office 2016 has a fair number of missing features compared to the Windows version. For example, one that I've seen mentioned in PowerPoint 2016 on Windows, you can embed a font into a presentation so that the presentation has a self-contained font that you can then play on other people's computers, and if they don't have the font, they can still play the presentation correctly. Office 2016 on the Mac, PowerPoint will play embedded fonts, but it has no tools to embed them, so you have to create the presentation on Windows and then you can play it on the Mac, which is that sort of annoying little limitation in a few places. Okay. So, getting back to the compatibility question, if you have Office 2011 which Microsoft stopped updating around about the time High Sierra came out. Microsoft's official position is we will not support this on High Sierra. We will give you absolutely no guarantee it will work. If there's any problems, we won't fix it because they're never touching it again in terms of software updates. So you're at your own risk if you run Office 2011 on High Sierra. Reports that I have seen indicate that it seems to work fine, but there's no guarantee it will keep working. If Apple does some subsequent updates and they break something, Microsoft is not going to do anything to fix it. So you're basically hoping that it will keep working if you run that. Having said that, Office 2008 had the same situation 3 years earlier, and it still works fine up to Sierra. So as far as I can tell, though I have seen a comment from somebody recently that they discovered that the help in Office 2008 has two versions. There's an offline help and an online help. The offline help is a basic set of help for it. The online help gives you more detailed information, but it gets it off the internet. Microsoft has recently changed the online help for Office 2008 to be an advertisement for Office 365. There is actually no online help anymore. So you have to revert back to the offline help and you get less help with it in that case. So the same might happen to later versions in future. So those are sort of the major things I'm aware of. There's all the various utility programs that haven't been updated yet for the new operating system. Disk Warrior just got an update to fix some issues, but it still can't handle the new file system, and they said they won't support the new file system until version 6 is available, which is not an unknown time in the future. So, yep. Okay, so as far as my experience with High Sierra goes, stability I've already mentioned. User interface, I barely noticed it. It's almost identical to Sierra, so if you're already used to Sierra, there's very, very little that's changed in the user interface in High Sierra. System preferences are all pretty much in the same place. There's a few more subtle things, like for example, if you install any software that needs a device driver that installs itself into the system, it won't run that driver until you go into system preferences and approve it. There's a new thing which appears in system preferences security to say, this has just been installed, do you want to allow it to work? And the ones that know about this feature actually tell you in the application how to go and find that. For example, I've got VMware Fusion, which is the virtual machine software to let me run other operating systems, and that has a prompt that told me, before this will work, you need to go and do this, and it tells you where to go. It can't do it for you because Apple deliberately wants it to be only a user-invoked permissions thing, not something the application can do behind your back, because that would defeat the purpose. But that sort of little extra bits of security here and there is sort of the only obvious feature, really. So as far as using it, as long as you aren't running old applications that are incompatible, it's not a major problem in terms of actually upgrading to High Sierra now, except for the fact that the installer appears to have a multitude of problems. And just going through them briefly, the ones that I've encountered personally or been aware of, in some cases, a computer got up to a certain point in High Sierra and then absolutely failed to install the next minor version. And I've encountered that personally with a Mac Mini I was helping somebody else on. I've seen a report recently of a similar problem where somebody is currently running 10.13.3, tries to install the 10.13.4 update and the computer restarts and it's still running 10.13.3. It goes around the loop again and nothing changes. It never installs 10.13.4. One of our WelMac members who doesn't usually come to meetings anymore, on a whim agreed to install High Sierra when it got prompted in App Store, and it went ahead and didn't install, and it was taking so long that she gave up and turned the computer off in the middle of it. And when she turned the computer back on, it wouldn't start up anymore, and none of the recovery methods worked. I spent 4 hours fixing the computer last weekend by having to manually delete the partly installed operating system, doing a clean install of a new copy of High Sierra, and then manually moving various pieces of what was left behind into the right places. It was not pleasant. All of this could have been avoided if she'd actually thought to do a backup first, because then we could restore the backup and try it again. But because she didn't have a backup, I was wanting to make sure that we didn't lose any data in the process. So if you have not upgraded to High Sierra yet and you intend to do so at some point, Number one rule, make sure you have a backup first. Furthermore, if you have a laptop or any other Mac with a solid state drive, I actually strongly recommend you having 2 separate full backups of the computer on different drives before you upgrade, because if anything goes wrong and you have to downgrade back to the old version, you are going to have to wipe your entire computer to restore the old backup. And if you do that and you've only got one backup and you wipe your main one, what happens if your backup drive fails in the middle of the restore? You've lost everything. So having 2 complete backups on different drives as a safety precaution before you upgrade to a major new version is a good idea. I actually had 4 on various different drives just to be, because I was happening to be updating several drives at the same time.
Do you have that backup on your time machine?
One of them on Time Machine is a good idea, that's fine. The main worry about Time Machine is it might be omitting some things, especially if you've previously configured it to not back up certain files, like I have. I've told it not to back up some of my big stuff. I prefer to do a combination of Time Machine and cloning the entire system onto a backup drive using software like SuperDuper or Carbon Copy Cloner. Because the advantage of a Time Machine backup, you can't boot from and use it as a working system in an emergency, whereas you can if you have a clone backup. So if something goes wrong, you need to go back into the old operating system to find out what's going on. You need a clone, not a Time Machine backup, otherwise you have to restore the whole thing before you can use it. So one backup as a Time Machine backup is fine, but I would recommend the second one be a clone on a separate hard drive.
What was that one you recommended?
The software I use is called SuperDuper. All that. So that's what SuperDuper looks like. It's got an optional schedule copies feature. I'm just using that to keep track of when I last did a clone to each of my drives. The last ones I did were, that's my, unfortunately now not working anymore, clone I did most recently. 3 days earlier I updated the one I keep at work. A day before that I updated the one I keep at home, one of the ones I kept at home, and about a month before that was the other one I keep at home. So I sort of have different drives in different locations as safety precautions in case something happens, like a house burns down or whatever. I've got more than one backup in different locations. That one is actually a year ago. It doesn't tell you the date, the year, but that's sitting in a friend's place, and I haven't visited them for a whole year now. We've been meeting up online rather than actually going and visiting in person, so I've lost my original pattern of that. And that one's actually just a reference copy of an older system, so it doesn't count. So SuperDuper is free for use if you're going to just do a straight copy of your entire system. There is a paid option which costs something in the order of $35. It's 20-something US dollars, I think. If you pay for it, the advantage is that it can then update an existing clone much faster because it only copies what's changed. So that specific feature costs money, but the basic copying feature is free. So if you just want to do a straight copy of everything on your hard drive as a one-off operation when you're upgrading or whatever, then you don't need to pay for it. I do like the user interface on this one. If I put one of my suitable drives here. Yes. Here. He says with his fingers crossed. That will do. That. Find the right adapter and the right drive. If I plug that one in, that will give me, this drive is missing a foot, so it's a bit rattly. Turn the drive on. Don't want to do that. I'll just wait for that drive to spin up. Is that going? There it is. So, if I pick one of my existing ones, I won't actually go ahead and do it because it will take hours, but one thing I like about this one is it has a reasonably clear description of what it's going to do, and as you choose different actions, it will update this description, and then once it actually starts, it shows you reasonably detailed progress information in terms of how many files it's copied and that sort of thing, so you can nudge of how it's proceeding. Unfortunately, as with all sort of time-based things, you can't really tell how long it's going to take. And the annoying thing about any method of file copying is that you're often dealing with lots and lots and lots of very small files, and then a few very big ones. And the general pattern is the big ones copy much faster than lots of small ones, which take as much space. So you can't get a reasonable estimate of how long it's going to take to copy. It might take, it'll vary depending on how much data you've got in your drive, obviously, but the number of files is a significant factor, as well as the size of the files.
So where it's got backup all files,
Yep.
you just back up photos?
No, it's got some limited options for just user files. You can probably create, it's got a somewhat complicated mechanism for creating scripts, which I've never bothered with, which might allow you to do that sort of thing. If you want more selective copying, then this isn't the best tool for the task. This one's really aimed at entire disk clones as a simple way of doing that. It also has options for whether or not to do the smart update feature, which as I pay for it, I can do that, which is the copying only changed files. Usually you don't need to fiddle with the advanced stuff. That's got some extra features that some people might need, but most of the time you don't need to worry about it. It can also do scheduled copies, so you can set up on a daily basis, or whatever you need to do, just do another clone, update your existing drive, whatever it might be. The other one is called Carbon Copy Cloner, which was free but isn't anymore. Haven't run the new version yet, so let's just run that. Oh, it's already out of date. Have I already downloaded that one? No. So if I go to I'll just download the latest version, so rather than using the built-in updater, because I like to keep a copy of the installer. Quit that. Didn't actually change anything, so where's the download button? Yep, let's grab that, and then find that, there it is. Drop that into applications. Right, so I've now updated it to the latest version. So Carbon Copy Cloner is around about $50, so it's a bit more expensive than Super Duper, but it has got extra features. Again, its primary task is to, I don't want to do that, destination, let's just choose my clone drive arbitrarily. So its user interface has improved a fair amount since older versions. Unfortunately, its window is wider than the screen, so you can't quite see the whole thing. It's designed for a wider aspect ratio. Why is this? It seems to have swapped back to the wrong. Yeah, that's right. 1280 by 100. It's designed for a bigger screen, obviously. So you can set up backup tasks with it, which you can then reuse and save them. I think, generally speaking, its user interface is now nicer than Super Duper. Super Duper looks a bit clunky, and this one has got the ability to have like saved tasks, whereas Super Duper, it's a bit not immediately obvious how you do a similar task in that. There is a option in here to copy all files or some files, which is more selectable, and then in there you can say I want to deselect the entire drive, and then come in here and pick in my users folder I will back up, in my home folder I will back up just the pictures folder, say, or something like that. So that is possible to do that sort of thing. You can't do that in Super Duper easily. So Carbon Copy Cloner is better if you want to do selective copies of pieces selected in that sort of file-based or folder-based mode. Let's go back to everything again. Cancel. And it's automatically excluding, it's showing you which things it's not even going to back up. So, for example, it never backs up the trashes folder. It excludes that because there's no point backing up your trash, especially if you just deleted something big. It'll just take longer. But again, you can schedule things. once at a specified time, hourly, weekly, monthly, or when you plug in a drive, which is quite a handy feature possibly. SuperDuper can do something similar to that. It's just user interface is a bit different. Yeah, so I'm gradually sort of getting my way around using carbon copy cloner sometimes, but I'm still using SuperDuper out of habit mostly. But because it's cheaper and more straightforward, I tend to recommend it for most people anyway. Carbon copy cloner can do a lot more, but there's more settings in it, and it's a bit harder to possibly to find your way around. Okay.
Would you recommend the 2 backups for when you're upgrading other than to Sierra?
Well, any major version, it's a good idea as a precaution for every major version upgrade, but especially for High Sierra because they're changing the file system and there's definitely no way of accessing the drive on the computer if you boot into an older operating system. With earlier system versions, like if you're going from El Capitan to Sierra or something like that, you still have to wipe the drive if you're going to downgrade to the previous operating system. But you do have the option of potentially booting from an older system and still accessing files on your drive before you do that. You can't do that with High Sierra if your computer is one that has been upgraded to the new file system, because older systems cannot access that at all. So it's especially necessary with High Sierra. I do recommend it with older ones just because if you have to wipe and go back to an older system, it means you've got 2 copies of everything still. Yeah. I don't think it's necessary if you're doing minor updates. Like if you're going from 10.13.3 to 10.13.4, for example, having at least one backup is a good idea, but having 2 entire clones is probably overkill. Hopefully. But again, if something goes wrong, you have to wipe it, you might end up with the same problem. Okay. Any questions, further questions at that point? Don't keep anything I've changed there. Okay, so High Sierra is fine. iOS 11.3, the main thing I wanted to show you there was the iPhone feature for battery life. Is my iPhone 6 in a usable state? Nearly. I'm going to have to plug it in again. Which means I can't. Oh, yes, I can. I can plug it in. I can plug it in through that. There we go. That'll let me charge it, and then I can borrow the. I've unlocked it. We don't need to be in low power mode. It'll work fine. Now this could be a challenge because this is going to be hanging in mid-air, so I might need to hang onto the cable. See how we go. Right, so here is my iPhone 6 Plus, which is my old one. It hasn't had the latest software update installed yet, and I haven't been keeping up on app updates, so it's a bit out of date. But if I go into iOS 11.3, has a new feature in the battery section, which I wanted to show you in particular, this thing called Battery Health Beta. So if I go into Battery Health Beta, it gives you this sort of level of information. Now this is a new feature which only applies to the iPhone 6 and later models. So it isn't available on iPads, it's not available on older iPhone models. The iPhone SE is included in that as well. It's basically an iPhone 6S in a different shape. So what Battery Health Beta does is it's giving you a moderate degree of information about the condition of your iPhone's battery. You can see there, now this just for reference, this is a 3.5-year-old iPhone which has still got its original battery. I was using it heavily as my main iPhone for the first 3 years of its life, and it's been sitting around not doing much for the last 6 months, so it hasn't actually gone through many battery cycles since then. So the first number which it tells you there is maximum capacity. So that is basically a measure of how much your battery is aged. So if it's brand new, it should say 100%. As it gets older and older, that number will drop.
This is something I've not got. You're just showing me, isn't it?
You will have it on. Yes, you will have it on a newer iPhone model.
Okay, whereabouts did you find it there? Sorry, I'm...
Yep. Under settings,
Yep.
go into general, and then go into, sorry, it's the wrong place. Settings,
Battery health and safety.
settings battery you need to go into. It's not in general. It's down in the second
Just
block.
above privacy, Dawn.
Yeah, you need to scroll down below, in the block, same block as general if you scroll down
So it's
further.
in the third block.
It would have been good if I hadn't canned it all out.
So it's got a green battery icon. And then in there is a thing saying battery health beta. So you have to be running iOS 11.3 or later to get that. So if you haven't installed any of the OS updates, you may not have it yet.
So that's the capacity of the battery?
Yes. So
Nothing to do with the charging?
no, that number does not change. The number on the top line you will see is currently says 8%. So the battery charge level is currently sitting on 8% of 82% of the original capacity.
Yeah.
So is what that's supposed to be saying.
Yours is 90%, I think it should be. Yes, it should, that's it, if you've got the SE now.
Is it in general?
No, underneath the block of options which include general, there is a battery.
Oh, I touch the darn thing and it goes into it.
Yeah. This is a new.
Like battery.
Under general.
No, not inside general,
No, I see.
below general in the same,
Yeah, in there.
and then it should say battery
It
health.
says battery health beta.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you click on that, it will tell you what your capacity is.
Oh,
So at what point would you?
Okay. The way that Apple specifies the batteries for their iPhones is that they say that, very confusingly, I'm not sure what they mean, the iPhone batteries are rated to retain up to 80% of their original charge capacity after 500 full charge cycles, or complete charge cycles. Now what that means is the more you use your battery on a daily basis, the earlier you'll reach the point where it has done 500 charge cycles. That's sort of the point that Apple thinks that the battery is sort of worn and you should be thinking about replacing the battery. Now, the confusing part of that statement is what on earth do they mean by up to 80% of the... does that mean anything from 0 to 79? Does it mean it's actually may have got as bad as 80% and they've badly worded it and they actually meant at least? I'm not entirely clear on what they mean by that. It's never been properly explained. Mine is... I happen to know the battery cycle count of my phone is 493, so I'm nearly at 500 cycles. Because I've got software on the Mac which can read that information out of the phone. It doesn't actually tell you that number on the screen, it just gives you a capacity reading.
After that day, we will drop the
It's basically saying beyond that point we don't guarantee what's going to happen, it may rapidly wear out. So assuming nothing actually physically goes wrong with the battery, then it should gradually decline in capacity until it gets to that point. That's the idea. Yes, Tony?
500 cycles, that's 500 dead and full charge.
Yeah, completely empty and then recharging again,
So-
or fractions, some or
so-
fractions thereof. So, say for example's
So
sake,
if you chuck it in charge every night, and then sometimes you use 10%, other times you use 50, 60%.
it's,
That 500 cycles is not going to equal
no.
500
If-
times you charge it.
if you are using your iPhone heavily enough that you completely flatten the battery and recharge it every day, it will last about a year and a half. If you use your iPhone every day on average that it uses half the charge, and then you recharge it, it will last roughly 3 years. So,
Does it make any difference if you actually chuck it on the charger and use it?
no, but there is a different problem that can occur. If you leave for all devices with lithium-ion batteries, if you tend to leave it plugged in all the time and you almost never run it from battery, the battery can die. It needs to actually run from battery occasionally to keep
So
working
what I was
reliably.
getting at was that if I get home from work and I know I'm going to have a session, say 4 hours or 5 hours, chuck it on the charger and use it heavily.
Yep, that's all right. It'll probably be working harder because it's charging the
It'll still
battery.
come down, won't it?
It depends on what you're doing.
Watching videos.
Yeah, well, watching videos usually isn't actually all that much work. It's more animations and processing this. The screen being on is one of the major power consumptions, but it can charge while the screen's on with a normal charger. So it's only a question of what else it's doing at the same time, but it will hold the battery charge at more or less the same level. It is worth keeping in mind though that the battery is an essential component in the process. When you've got it plugged in and you're using it, it's actually charging the battery, and the phone is operating from the battery. So everything's running around in a kind of a loop. It's not bypassing the battery. Yeah. So it's not running it directly off the mains.
My test is going to be, because I actually don't physically plug my charger into my phone. I actually use a wireless charger.
That charges at a slower rate, so you might find that if you use it heavily.
I actually have one at home. I have two at home, which are third-party ones, and I have one in the car. So I don't actually physically plug it. It goes onto a pad and charges. So I want to see what it's...
But it's rather tricky to use the phone in that situation because you can't pick it up. You take it off the pad.
But if it's in the car, it's locked in the cradle. You don't want to pick it up while you're driving anyway.
No, true, but yeah.
But,
well, that's a classic example. If you've got your phone plugged in the car and you're using it for navigation or something like that, even if the phone screen's on all the time, it's able to maintain the charge in the phone. So that's a good example.
Because I know...
And right now,
yeah,
it's got to 12%, even though the screen's on. So
in most situations, usually with me, using it at work, it only gets down to about 76% or 80%, and then when I'm driving home, it gets fully charged again. So with the new phone, so
okay, so that's to explain roughly what maximum capacity means. The second part of that section. And I've seen, we managed to find somebody who had a phone at the Wellington meeting last week that wasn't showing what mine did, it actually was in the faulty state, so I've seen what it looks like now. But the heading always says peak performance capacity, and then the text underneath it is the important bit. So my one is saying your battery is currently supporting normal peak performance. In other words, the battery is behaving well enough that the iPhone hasn't done anything which is try to draw more power than the battery can actually deliver. Since I installed iOS 11.3.
we actually didn't think if we'd taken a screenshot of that screen.
Oh, I can show you what it says because I've got online examples, but I don't need to, because there's articles. iPhone, iOS peak.
Who's gone to the state where it basically shut down? The battery got that old.
That's the one. So that iMore had a whole series of screenshots, so I didn't actually need to take a screenshot. Yep. So I'll just find the screen. And there it is. Right. So if I go back to, so you can see what mine says. Your battery is currently supporting normal peak performance. How this mechanism works is when if at some point your phone tries to draw more power than the battery can supply, it will suddenly turn off. When that happens, the computer the operating system notices that that's happened and enables the performance throttling mode, which limits its peak performance. So after that point, it will then, if it's trying to work hard, it will reduce performance to try to avoid another unexpected shutdown. That's the way it works, and it tells you with a different message on that particular screen. So here's some screenshots showing examples of what it could say. So. Maximum capacity, peak performance capability. That's that second one there is what my phone is saying. Your battery is currently, can I zoom in on that? Probably not. Yeah, it's better. It's currently supporting normal peak performance. When you get unexpected shutdown, you get this one. This iPhone has experienced an unexpected shutdown because the battery was unable to deliver the necessary peak power. Performance management has been applied to help prevent this from happening again. So that is generally a hint that your battery is actually worn to the point that you should be looking at getting it replaced, but independent of what it says for maximum capacity. This down here is an interesting one. This iPhone is unable to determine battery health. An Apple authorized service provider can service the battery. That can happen if you have a third-party battery replacement which hasn't been set up correctly. Basically, the software doesn't know what on earth the battery does because it doesn't have any information it can understand out of it. Now, if you do get that second one, warning about the peak, it's had an unexpected shutdown, there is a button in there called disable. You can actually choose to basically say, I don't care that it's shut down, I want to go back to as fast as possible again, even if it means my phone suddenly turns off on me. And when you do that, it tells you this one. The phone has experienced an unexpected shutdown because the battery was unable to deliver the necessary peak power. You have manually disabled performance management protections. So basically, if it turns off again, it's your fault, because you decided you wanted it to turn off rather than slowing down. So, and then there's also a fourth one, which adds this extra note: your battery health is significantly degraded. An Apple authorised service provider can replace the battery to restore full performance and capacity. I think that one appears if you get below 80% maximum capacity. So it's actually, that's the point where Apple thinks, okay, your battery, if your battery maximum capacity is dropping, they also may have to invoke the peak performance limiting feature, because they can't, the battery can't actually sustain that much power output. Now, interestingly, my phone is saying 82%. However, the third-party software I got on the Mac, which measures what the iPhone battery performance is, has got a completely different idea. I'm curious who's right. I'm actually suspicious that Apple is fudging the truth a little bit. If I'm
Getting a new bed.
well, to avoid, I won't plug that in through there because that'll confuse the issue if I plug that in.
How much do you get that fresh cost?
Okay, this year only, Apple has discounted new batteries to what works out to, I think, I've now forgotten the number, I think it's about 50 New Zealand dollars. Normally they used to be about 150, so they've significantly discounted them. So if you want to get a new battery for an iPhone, it's a good idea to get one this year, even if you don't think you're quite at the point yet where it needs to be replaced. Now, I've got this third-party utility called Coconut Battery, which measures the battery performance of your computer and also iOS devices if they're currently plugged in. So that my Mac's battery is saying it's down to 88% of its original capacity. The Mac's cycle count is on 515. I mentioned before that the 500 cycles is sort of the recommended limit for the iPhone. The iPhone is the only Apple product that has that limit. All the rest of them are 1,000. So I think the issue there is the iPhone consumes considerable power, and the limited space means they can't have more battery physically installed in the thing unless they made it twice as thick. So the iPhone doesn't have as much overall lifetime capacity, whereas iPads do. They have twice as much. So do Apple Watches, even though they're physically smaller, because they don't do as much, and so do the Macs. So the Macs have up to, all the rest of them have 1,000 charge cycles as the recommended limit. So this is only halfway through its lifetime in a approaching 5-year-old computer. The problem I'm going to run into is that once it hits 5 years old, and this model, 5 years after this model was discontinued, Apple can't supply service parts anymore. So even though I'm only halfway through the battery life, I'm intending to keep using this computer for a while yet, so I'm going to get the battery replaced even though I don't actually need to yet. So,
And your iPhone.
yeah, if I go and have a look, there's my iPad Pro, which is sitting on 95% of its design capacity, and if I click on my iPhone 6 Plus, that don't look too good. Now, interestingly, Apple said 82%, this one says 36%, and what's more, it gives detailed numbers, and because it's giving detailed numbers, which it is actually being told by the device, I'm inclined to believe it. Because what it says is the original design capacity of this model was to have a 2,915 milliamp hour battery. The current full charge capacity is only 1,051, which is... Right, we have a song and dance number coming up.
Well, it said I had to use the thing for a short while before it would show me.
Ah, right. Yeah, so the actual measured capacity of the battery is down to 36% of what it was when new. So I don't know why Apple's saying 82%, because that number doesn't make sense. And its current charge level is only up to 17%. So that's, you can see there, it's only got 182 milliamp hours. That's 17% of that number, and that one is 36% of that number. Now this isn't quite stable. It goes up to about 1100 and something when the battery gets full. So, but I've noticed some odd behaviour with this phone, including it's sort of at times I'm using the phone and the battery level suddenly starts counting down 1% every second or two, and it drops down to about 25% lower and then stabilises again. That's probably an indication that there is a faulty battery cell inside this phone, and Apple's software is not correctly identifying it. This one is. I think it may actually have two faulty cells because the capacity is so much lower. So this is only a beta version of the battery health thing, and they may not have quite caught all the edge cases yet. So I'm hopeful that I can actually provide some useful information before I get the battery replaced or at the same time. So I might submit a report to Apple suggesting why is this battery health saying this when the numbers coming back out of the status reports are quite different. So yeah, this is quite a useful piece of software which I had before this information was available, so it gives me another point of reference. My iPhone 10 by comparison is quite new, and I think it's on 90-something% still. So iPhone 10, yeah, 98.6%. So as you'd hope. In fact, when it was closer to new, it was actually over 100% the battery capacity, and this one was actually more than Apple specified. So they over-provision the batteries when they're brand new to give you more life out of them. Yep. So, okay.
Just one, see what my one's like
Oh, right, you'll be even newer, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll need to approve it. You'll need to unlock it because this won't have access to it.
Otherwise, it's last update.
You'll need to say trust the computer or something. Can't see it yet. It's not asking to trust the computer. It normally should.
Is that your Apple doing, yeah?
There it is, Shane's iPhone. Please trust this Mac in the dialog on your iOS device. It should be asking you to trust the computer, but it didn't actually do it. That's there's a security feature on iOS devices. They won't let you, if you plug it into a foreign computer, you can't access the phone until you approve the connection on the phone. So pull it out and plug it back in again. It should actually say, do you want to trust this computer? Do you want, continue. There you go. They're trying to trigger that. So you got to type in your passcode. So that should refresh. It's not showing it yet. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yours is currently sitting on 100%, so close that it's actually slightly over 100 if you look at those raw numbers. And it's currently sitting on 62 cycles. So it's about 10% of the way through its number of cycles since you got it.
about a month and a half.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you unplug it, Shane, I'll plug mine in just so I get that number again.
That must be because I'm doing that. Thing charging.
Mine's on 76, so I've had it since early December. So what's that, 5 roughly months? Yeah, so 150 days ballpark. So it's using about half a charge cycle a day, which is similar to what I was doing with my previous phone. Yeah, I tend to keep my phone plugged in most of the day while I'm at work and operate it on battery the rest of the time. Sometimes, like in the weekends, I'll plug it in to recharge it because it won't last the whole weekend. But otherwise, I don't often plug it in unless I'm in the car on a long trip or something like that. But it's not a question of how often you charge it. It's how much you're using the battery, on the theory that you're going to have to recharge it anyway. So it's really the usage that controls this, not the recharging.
That version is basically both batteries really small.
Yeah, so it's very similar. This whole mechanism is currently only available on the iPhone, but it's really only the iPhones that are seriously affected by limitations on available power from the batteries. iPads have such bigger batteries that even if one of the cells in the iPad fails, they can cope with it and won't unexpectedly shut down and so on. Yep.
Backpacks. pack.
You mean extra battery packs? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Put on,
Yep.
plugged in.
Yes. Well, if you need it, it's the primary reason for having one of those is if you're expecting to be able to use your device for an extended period away from a power source. If you're going to be using, for example, GPS functions in an iPhone, and you're going to be out in the wilderness or something like that for a while, it definitely makes sense in that case, because the only way you could charge it otherwise would be a solar charge you've got to carry with a big panel that opens up or something like that. It takes forever, yeah. So if you were doing something like doing astronomy work at night and then not using your phone much during the day, it would make sense to be able to plug it into a solar charger and then be actively using it at night. But if you're doing activities during the day and not sitting still, then you probably can't plug in the solar charger to your phone. So having some kind of extra battery case makes sense. And the way they generally work is that, as far as the phone is concerned, it's got an external power supply plugged in, and so the phone is basically draining the external battery to keep its internal battery charged. And then once the external battery goes flat, the internal battery will start to discharge at a normal rate. So effectively extends the life of the internal battery by whatever capacity the external one's got. I've bought a device of that class, which is basically a battery with a solar panel, and you can plug any USB device into it, and it acts like a USB power supply. So it's my emergent, in the theory that if we have an extended power cut or something, it's my emergency to keep your phone charged. Then as long as I can charge that one up again, it takes about 2 days to fully recharge it from using solar though, so it wouldn't be practical unless it was kept close to charge at the time I needed it.
You just go to your vehicle.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, but like I'm thinking of sort of a week-long disaster or something like that, where I can't get the car out because there's been an earthquake or something, and there's been a landslip, and therefore the car's run out of fuel if I use it too much. So, and I don't like sitting there having the car running the engine all the time just to keep a battery running. But anyway, gives me another option.
I found out exactly when I was 23rd of February. I purchased that iPhone.
Right, so you're only about 2 months behind me in that case. Yeah. December, that's right, yeah, because I remember you bought an iPhone 8, didn't you? And then you decided you wanted the 10.
Plus,
Yeah.
and then,
Okay.
Staff rates
no, it wasn't. I got staff rates on the Apple Care and stuff. Yes.
Okay.
Fine, I'm paid for.
Any questions? Apart from that battery feature, iOS 11.3 appears to be just a reasonably straightforward update. If anybody has been holding off on upgrading to iOS 11 because of concern about stability and things, I've been running iOS 11 apart from a few minor annoying bugs. I haven't noticed any problems with it really for several versions now. The only significant issue that's remaining is the question of whether you've got any older applications that don't work in iOS 11, which I'll just show you the mechanism. If you're still running iOS 10.3, it was a new feature in that version, Apple added a feature to unlock. Is that coming up? If you have a device running either iOS 11 or iOS 10, it actually has a section under Settings, General, Applications, about Applications, got to find it again, there it is, and if you'll notice that Applications about halfway down my list with a 208 beside it, it has a chevron pointing to the right. That indicates that there is another menu inside there. If you have any applications that don't run on iOS 11, that section will be available and it will show you a list of them. So if you're still running iOS 10.3, that list tells you these applications won't work if you upgrade to iOS 11. If you're already running iOS 11, it's basically saying these applications don't work because they're older ones that haven't been updated. I deliberately kept those three there as examples. I don't actually need them. Just so I had some. I had a list that was longer than the screen when I started, and I deleted most of them because I didn't need them anymore. I managed to find replacements for a few of them, but those three I haven't bothered to because I don't particularly care about them. if you have got any applications in that category and you really need them, then you pretty much can't upgrade to iOS 11 or buy a new device, because they'll all come with iOS 11 until you can find a replacement for those applications. Similarly, the Mac has started warning about the same sorts of things. Which one is it? Not that, not that, not that, not that, not that, not that, not that. Where's it gone? There's an example. Go back one. Find the correct screen again. Otherwise you can't see what I'm looking at. Okay. macOS 10.13.4 has added a new feature. If you are running older applications that are done again, 32-bit. What's it done here? It's not jumping into the right place. When you run an application that is still only 32-bit, the first time you run the application, macOS 10.13.4 warns you about it, like this. Drag thing is not optimized for your Mac or whatever the application is called. This app needs to be updated by its developer to improve compatibility. So that message appears once the first time you launch that application after you run macOS 10.13.4. You click the OK button, you'll never see it again for that application, unless you uninstall the application and install it again or something like that. I've seen that for a few of my applications that I already knew were in this category, and what that's basically saying is that High Sierra is okay with running these, but Apple has already warned that it is the last operating system version that will run these old applications without compromise. Don't know what that means yet. Hopefully we'll know a bit more about what that means yet in a month or so.
Most of the time it'll just be that particular application would farm out, wouldn't it?
No. Well, basically what they're saying, that they actually told us last year that macOS 10.14 or 10.13 would be the last version that runs them without compromise, and they were planning that 2 versions away, 10.15, would be the version that would not run them. So it wouldn't bomb out, it won't launch at all, they simply cannot run it anymore. So effectively they're giving you up to 2 years warning, or a year and a half, that if you keep your operating system immediately up to date, at some point, not in the not too distant future, this application won't work anymore unless the developer does something about it. Or you upgrade to a later version, because in some cases you get this just because you're running an old version of the application.
That happened with me with Excel.
Yep. Microsoft Office 2011 is one example. That's 32-bit applications. They will not ever be updated unless you pay to upgrade to a later version of Office. So effectively that means that there is a definite end of life on those applications for running on newer future operating system versions. So I don't want to go into too much detail about that now, because we'll know more in a month or so once Apple has a developer conference. Well, not at the beginning of next month, but more, it'll actually be 2 months away for our meetings here before I can talk about it, because it's the second week or so of June when they have the conference. But hopefully then they'll reveal details about what they're going to do in terms of 32-bit applications for future macOS versions. But in some cases I've got like drag thing I've been using since back in the macOS 9 days, and the developer has barely touched it apart from minor tweaks to fix compatibility problems. So I don't